Hi, Jerry Biden for Guitar YouTube, and this is something from my book, Why Pop Music Sucks. And it's the 70s, the 1970s. To me, that was like heaven. The 70s, yeah, had its problems like every decade does. But there are many aspects to the 70s that made things tolerable, livable, affordable, and kind of a happy place for us before the 80s came, okay, and kind of ruined things. The 70s was an era built upon the aspects within which those of talent were able to learn, develop, and prosper. Okay? The music business was, at least, willing to invest in what they thought was a way to make money. Yes, the business end of things is always about that. However, at that time, it was also about finding the most talented and the most communicative pop artists, because that would sell the most units, right? It was a more honest, pragmatic approach, that which is not the case presently. Music was incredibly varied. It was being experimented upon, presented eclectically, and used as a vehicle that could only be described as sleek, sexy, and fun. Okay. The radio stations were very important to the younger demographic and the pursuit of increasing pop music knowledge. Radio stations were mostly independently owned, unlike the modern arrangement where most are corporate owned. Stations would feature disc jockeys or hosts that were very knowledgeable, okay, about what they were presenting. It was pop music school for all of us. They would encourage everyone to call in and request tunes to play. Most radio personalities would play cuts from the current top-selling records that were not singles, or the most popular cuts on the album. Some would even play bootleg recordings, which were actually illegal to play and promote. The decade had its difficulties, such as oil shortages, inflation, international conflicts in Vietnam and Iran. However, anyone could buy a single family home for around $30,000, okay? College tuition in the California public system was free until 1975. Yes, that means UCLA was tuition free until 1975. Most common fast food franchises were still independently owned, which meant the food was still exceptionally good and affordable. Young students never had 4 to 5 hours of homework after coming home from school. Never. We hung out at each other's homes, which were typically single-family homes, because most anyone could afford to buy a house, especially in the 60s, okay? Let alone in the 70s. I only had one friend or knew one person that lived in an apartment. One. The parental level of permission was very high. My friends and I were going to concerts every month, like 2-3 times, by ourselves. Our parents were never involved in those experiences. They allowed us to go to a, say, Day on the Green at Oakland Coliseum and experience a lineup such as the following. Opening act, AC/DC with Bon Scott. Second up, Van Halen on their very first tour. Third, Pat Travers Band with Tommy Aldridge and Pat Thrall. Fourth up, Foreigner, okay, with Lou Gramm, of course. Headliner was Aerosmith, okay. It was all a mere $14.50 per ticket, and I thought that was getting expensive. Okay, no problem. You know, and I was very young. But from what I gather, musicians were able to make a nice living as a local musician at the time. You know, they didn't have to go touring everywhere and stuff. They could just kind of stay at home and gig around because there were so many places to gig at. You know, that's all we had. The whole DJ thing hadn't taken hold at all at that point. So, and also great players were everywhere, right down the street. Okay. I got word on the street in my neighborhood that there was a guy living down around the corner on this other street, side street, and he was renting a house. And he played guitar and practiced guitar all the time, and he was into Pat Martino. And I went, really? You know, that person said, you can see him, he's, you know, somebody playing guitar in the living room right there, right? And so I got up my bike, I'm riding around, and I get down into this street that he said that person was, and lo and behold, there's some guy practicing guitar. I walk up to the door, you know, kunk, kunk, kunk. He opens the door, and I ask, hey, are you the guy that's into Pat Martino? And he goes, oh, yeah, man, come on in. You know, we sat there for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever, and I picked his brain, and he was showing me how he was trying to have Pat's kind of whole thing with, you know, big, thick-ass strings and kind of high action. And then he talked about all this stuff, and he hit me to other great guitar players, and kind of, we talked about how to listen, or he was, you know, imparting his knowledge to me. He was pretty young. He was great. And right down the street. And no, you're not going to have that anymore. It doesn't exist. Okay? Unfortunately. But it was like that. They were all around. Great players were everywhere. It was ridiculous. Go into anything. You could go into dive bars. You can go to a lounge. You can go into whatever restaurant, because typically, if it's music, they're going to hire a band, a duo, a little trio, quartet, blah, blah. And some clubs, they had bigger stages so they can have an entire 11, 12-piece horn band, you know. And typically, all those, I wouldn't say all, but I would say most were killer, okay? Most were very good, okay? If not great. There was greatness in there, okay? And that's just in the city that I lived in, which was San Jose, California. It's ridiculous. It's all gone now. But that's what it was like, okay? But that's the 70s. I wish we could just get into a time machine of sorts and just go back and just leave me there, okay? There are more details in the book, in the chapter of the 70s. And which I think would be the fourth chapter. Yeah, fourth chapter. It's a very quick read. Okay, I purposely made it that way because I know people, you know, they don't like reading all that much anymore. So, but go to my website, jerrybyden.com or whypopmusicsucks.com. Order the book that way. I only offer the hard copy because through an arrangement with Amazon, the ebook can only be bought there. So if you want the ebook, you got to go to Amazon. But if you buy it through my website, you'll get a hard copy that's signed by me. Okay? Jerry Byden for Guitar YouTube. Thanks. Bye.